I always thought I had the kind of life people envied. A solid house in a quiet neighborhood, a wife who still turned heads at 52, two kids who, though grown and gone, called on Sundays without fail. On paper, it was perfect, stable, the kind of life a man was supposed to want. Every morning, I woke at 6:15, brewed coffee in the same chipped mug I'd used for a decade, and stood at the kitchen window watching the sun rise over the oak tree in the backyard. The ritual never changed. Linda would pad downstairs in her robe, her hair sleep mussed, and give me that half smile, the one that didn't quite reach her eyes anymore. We'd exchange the usual, "Sleep okay?" "Yeah, you?" "Same." I drove to work in my sensible sedan, the same route for 12 years, past the same mailboxes, the same faded, slow, children at play sign. At the office, I nodded to colleagues who called me the steady hand, reliable, unshakable. I managed budgets, smoothed over conflicts, went to lunch at the same diner every Thursday. No one ever asked if I liked it. Why would they? I was the man who had it all figured out. But there were cracks, small ones at first. The way Linda's laughter had become polite, measured, like she was conserving it for better company. The way she'd started going to bed early, claiming headaches, while I stayed up staring at the news with the volume low. The way we'd stopped arguing altogether, not because we agreed, but because it was easier to let silence fill the gaps. Sometimes I'd catch her staring at her phone with a faint smile, thumb hovering over the screen like she was deciding whether to send a message. Once, I asked who she was texting. "Just Susan," she'd said too quickly, slipping the phone into her pocket. I didn't press. Maybe I didn't want to know. Then came the little absences, errands that took longer than they should, a new blouse she hadn't worn for me, a perfume that wasn't hers lingering on her coat. I told myself I was imagining things. Paranoia was for insecure men, and I was not that guy. I was the rock, the one who held everything together. But one evening, as I sat on the porch with a bourbon I didn't really want, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors I no longer noticed, it hit me. I was a ghost in my own life, a placeholder, the man who paid the bills, fixed the leaky faucet, and slept on the left side of the bed out of habit. The next morning, Linda left for her yoga class at 7 a.m. I didn't ask why she was wearing earrings for Downward Dog. I just stood at the window, coffee gone cold in my hand, and wondered when exactly the road had forked, and why I'd only just noticed. I told myself I wouldn't look. That's what a trusting husband would do. Just go about his day, unshaken. But trust isn't something you decide. It's something you feel. And that morning, as I stood in the garage pretending to organize old tools, I felt nothing but the weight of suspicion pressing down on me like a bad heart. Linda had left her phone on the counter. She never did that. Always kept it glued to her, like it held some secret part of her life that needed guarding. But there it was, face up, buzzing softly with a notification. A name flashed on the screen. Mark. Not Susan. Not any name I recognized. Just Mark. I didn't pick it up. I didn't have to. That single word was enough to unravel something in me. I stood there, gripping a wrench I hadn't used in years, and tried to remember the last time Linda had mentioned a Mark. A co-worker, a friend from the gym. But the truth slithered in before I could stop it. She doesn't talk about her life to you anymore. The garage smelled of oil and dust, the same as it had for 20 years. I used to find comfort in that smell. Now it just felt stale. I put the wrench back in its place, carefully, like I was afraid I'd break something if I moved too fast. When Linda came back for her phone, she didn't even glance at me, just scooped it up with a quick, "Thanks," like I was the help. I wanted to ask, "Who's Mark?" But the words stuck in my throat. Maybe I was afraid of the answer. Or maybe I was afraid she'd lie, and I'd have to decide whether to believe her. That night, I lay awake listening to the quiet of the house. The clock ticked in the hallway. The fridge hummed downstairs. Linda breathed softly beside me, turned away, her back a wall I didn't know how to climb over. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the birthdays, the vacations, the way she used to laugh at my dumb jokes. When had it stopped being enough? When had I stopped being enough? I got up before dawn and sat at the kitchen table with a glass of whiskey I didn't even like. The sun rose slowly, painting the room in weak gray light. I stared at my reflection in the window. A man in his 50s, tired eyes, a face that had stopped surprising anyone a long time ago. And then it hit me. I wasn't just losing her. I'd already lost myself. Somewhere along the way, I'd become a ghost in my own life, haunting the edges of a marriage that didn't want me anymore. The question wasn't, what do I do now? It was, how long have I been pretending not to know? The whiskey stopped working. That was the first sign something had to change. For weeks, I'd been nursing the same bottle of Maker's Mark, watching the level sink lower each night as I sat at the kitchen table tracing water rings with my thumb. But one evening in late October, I poured myself 3 fingers and realized it didn't dull the ache anymore. It just made the room spin while my thoughts stayed sharp as broken glass. That's when I noticed the lottery ticket. It was stuck to the fridge with a faded World's Best Dad magnet my daughter had given me 15 years ago. One of those scratch-offs from the gas station, the kind Linda used to buy as a joke when she filled up her car. Except this one wasn't scratched, and Linda hadn't driven her own car in months. Richard always sent a town car to pick her up for their business dinners. I peeled it off the magnet, the paper brittle between my fingers. The expiration date was 2 days away. Some detached part of me thought, this is how she sees me now, something forgotten, about to expire. I scratched it with a quarter from the junk drawer. The metallic flakes came away like old skin. $5,000. Not life-changing, not enough to fix a broken marriage or make a 55-year-old man feel young again, but enough to make my hand shake as I stared at those zeros, enough to make me wonder, for the first time in years, what if? I cashed it the next morning at the same gas station where she'd bought it. The clerk didn't look up as he counted out the hundreds. Outside, autumn sunlight cut through the haze of gasoline fumes, and for a moment, I just stood there, breathing. The money felt heavy in my pocket. Not just paper, possibility. That afternoon, I drove past the old garage on Elm Street. For lease sign hanging crooked in the window. The place had been empty for years, ever since old man Henderson retired. I could still smell the grease and gasoline from my high school days when I'd help him tune up cars after class. The memory came back so strong it hurt, the satisfaction of fixing something with my own hands, of making broken things run again. I called the number on the sign. When I got home, Linda was packing another overnight bag. "Conference in Chicago," she said without meeting my eyes. The lie was so practiced, it barely registered. I didn't ask, just nodded and walked to the bedroom we hadn't shared in months. On my dresser sat the cashier's check, first month's rent and security deposit. The keys to Henderson's old garage jingled in my pocket like a promise. That night, as Linda's Uber pulled away, I realized something. I'd spent so long watching my life fall apart that I forgot I could rebuild. The question wasn't whether she'd come back. It was whether I'd still care if she did. The first time I heard them whispering about us, about her, was at Marty's Diner. I'd been going there for coffee every Thursday morning for 20 years, sitting in the same cracked vinyl booth near the window. That morning, the air smelled like burnt bacon and dish soap, same as always. But the looks from the regulars were different. 2 women from Linda's book club sat in the corner, their heads bent together. When I walked in, their conversation stuttered to a stop. One of them, Janet, whose husband I'd helped when his transmission gave out last winter, gave me a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. The other busied herself stirring her coffee, the spoon clinking like a tiny alarm bell. I pretended not to notice. Ordered my usual black coffee, 2 eggs over easy, and stared at the grease stains on the menu, but my skin prickled with the weight of their stares. Everyone in this town knew, and no one had told me. The waitress, a new girl half my age, slid my plate across the formica. "You're Jack, right?" she asked, too casually. "The mechanic?" I nodded. She hesitated, then leaned in. "My boyfriend's got a '78 Firebird that's been sitting in his dad's barn since—" "Bring it by the garage," I cut in. I didn't want her pity. Didn't want to be the sad old man everyone was whispering about. Outside, the October wind bit through my jacket. I walked the long way back to the garage, past the florist shop where Linda used to buy peonies every anniversary. The display window was empty now, just a single wilted rose lying on its side. When I got to work, Mike was waiting for me, leaning against the hood of a '65 Mustang I'd been restoring. He held out a styrofoam cup, more coffee. "Heard you had a rough morning," he said. I took the cup. The heat seeped through the thin material, almost too hot to hold. "That bad, huh?" Mike sighed. "People talk." That's when I saw it. The way his jaw tightened. The way he couldn't quite meet my eyes. He knew more than he was saying. I turned the key in the garage's rusted lock. The door screeched open, revealing the half-finished projects bathed in dusty sunlight. For the first time since I'd signed the lease, the sight didn't comfort me. "Just say it," I told Mike. He rubbed a hand over his beard. "Saw Linda last night, at the Oak Room." The fancy steakhouse Richard liked, the one with the $200 bottles of wine. "She was with him?" I asked, though I already knew. Mike hesitated. "Not just him." The coffee turned to acid in my stomach. Inside the garage, the radio played some old Springsteen song about glory days. I picked up a wrench, felt the familiar weight in my hand. The metal was cold. "There were others?" I asked quietly. Mike didn't answer. He didn't have to. I tightened a bolt on the Mustang's engine, my hand steady even though my chest felt like it was cracking open. The truth settled over me like garage dust, thick and inescapable. This wasn't just an affair. It was a whole life she'd built without me, and the real question wasn't who knew. It was how long had I been the last to find out. I found her earring under the passenger seat of my truck, a delicate silver teardrop, one from the pair I'd bought her for our 25th anniversary. The sight of it there, lodged between the seat rail and a crumpled gas receipt, made my hands freeze on the steering wheel. She hadn't ridden in my truck since last winter. The garage bay door was still open, letting in the golden light of early evening. I sat there staring at that earring, turning it between my fingers like some archaeological artifact from a dead civilization. The metal was cold. I wondered if it had fallen out when she was laughing, if Richard had noticed it missing, if he'd bought her new ones by now. That's when headlights swept across the driveway. Her Lexus pulled in too fast, kicking up gravel. She stepped out in that careful way she had when she'd been drinking, one deliberate foot in front of the other, like walking a tightrope, the kind of controlled stumble I'd seen 100 times after charity galas and country club parties. Only now, she wasn't coming home from some society event. She was coming home from him. I closed my fist around the earring, the post bit into my palm. "Jack." She stopped halfway across the garage, her shadow stretching long in the work lights. "You're still here." As if I had anywhere else to be. I held up the earring between us. The silver caught the light, swinging like a pendulum. "Found something of yours." Her hand flew to her bare earlobe. A flicker of panic quickly smoothed away. "Oh, I wondered where that went." Silence pooled between us, thick as motor oil. Somewhere outside, crickets had started their evening song. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral, not the light citrus scent she used to wear. "You were right," she said suddenly, "about Mark." I almost laughed. After all these months of pretending, of carefully not asking, she picked now to confess? When she'd been caught? When I was holding the evidence in my hand? But then she said the words that changed everything. "It's not just him." The garage seemed to tilt, the tools on the wall, the half-restored Mustang, the calendar still turned to August, all of it blurred at the edges. I realized I was holding my breath. She took a step closer, her heels clicking on the concrete. "I think we should—" "Don't." My voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "Don't say what you think we should do." Because suddenly, I understood. This wasn't about honesty. This was about control. She'd gotten careless, been seen too many places with too many men, and now the rumors had caught up with her. This confession wasn't for me. It was for her. A way to dictate the terms of our ending. The earring was still in my hand. I set it carefully on the workbench, the tiny clink of metal on metal absurdly loud in the quiet garage. The question wasn't whether to believe her. It was why she'd finally decided to tell the truth. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday, the same day the first snow fell. I watched the flakes stick to the garage windows as I turned the envelope over in my hands. Linda's signature was already there, looping and confident, the way she'd signed Christmas cards and mortgage documents for 30 years. The space where my name should go stared back at me, blank and waiting. I set the papers aside on my workbench next to the carburetor I'd been rebuilding. The metal parts gleamed under the fluorescent lights, each piece clean and precise in its disassembly. I envied that, the way machinery could be taken apart and put back together without losing its purpose. That night, I found myself standing in the doorway of our bedroom, her bedroom now, for the first time in months. The room smelled like her new perfume, that cloying floral scent that clung to everything. Her jewelry box sat open on the dresser, half empty. The pearl necklace I'd given her on our 10th anniversary was gone, but it was the closet that stopped me cold. Her winter coat still hung there, a row of wool and cashmere ghosts. I ran my hand along the sleeves, feeling the weight of them. Then I saw it, the corner of a shoebox peeking out from behind her evening gowns, the kind that used to hold her good heels. The box was lighter than I expected. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, were ticket stubs, hotel keycards, a matchbook from some restaurant in the city, a Polaroid of her laughing, her head thrown back, someone's hand resting on her waist just out of frame. I sat on the floor of her closet, the evidence of her other life spread around me like fallen leaves. The dates on the stubs went back years, back to when I thought we were just in a rough patch, back to when she'd blamed the distance on my work hours, on stress, on getting older. The furnace kicked on downstairs, the house groaning around me. I thought about all those nights I'd lain awake staring at the ceiling, wondering what I could do to fix us. All the apologies I'd made for things I hadn't done. All the pieces of myself I'd sanded down to fit into the shrinking space she allowed me. I put everything back exactly as I'd found it. Closed the box. Slid it behind the gowns. The snow kept falling outside, covering the driveway, the walkway, the garden she'd stopped tending last summer. Standing at the bedroom window, I watched the flakes dissolve against the glass. The question wasn't whether to sign the papers. It was why I'd ever thought love should feel like this. I waited until spring to sign the papers, let the ink dry while watching new leaves bud on the oak tree outside my garage apartment, the one I'd rented after leaving the house to Linda. The lawyer said I could have fought for more, but what was left to take? She'd already claimed the best years of my life. The house was just a shell. The shoebox stayed hidden in her closet. I never mentioned it. Some truths are like grenades. Once you pull the pin, there's no controlling the damage. But on moving day, as I carried the last box to my truck, I slipped the Polaroid from that box into my wallet, not to punish her, to remind myself how long I'd been living a lie. Months passed, the garage thrived. Classic car owners from 3 counties over started bringing me their treasures. I'd lost a wife, but rediscovered the satisfaction of making broken things whole again, even if I couldn't do the same for myself. Then, one rainy October afternoon, Linda's Lexus pulled into the garage. Not the sleek new model Richard had bought her, but the old one, the one we'd picked out together the year our daughter graduated high school. The driver's side door creaked when she opened it, a sound I knew by heart. She looked thinner. Her hair was darker than she'd worn it in years, closer to how it looked when we first met. The check engine light came on, she said, handing me the keys. Her wedding ring was gone. I lifted the hood more to hide my face than to inspect the engine, the familiar scent of her vanilla air freshener mixed with gasoline. "How's Richard?" I asked, wiping my hands on a rag. Her laugh was bitter. "Gone. Turns out I wasn't the only one he took to the oak room." The irony should have tasted sweet. Instead, it sat between us like another unspoken truth. I tightened a loose valve cover bolt that didn't need tightening. "Light's probably just a sensor. I'll reset it." She hovered near the workbench, running a finger through the dust. "You look good, Jack." I nearly laughed. All those years I'd ached for her to see me, really see me. And now she did when I'd stopped waiting for her approval. The Polaroid burned in my wallet. You know, she said softly, I never meant to. Don't. I closed the hood with a thud. We're past meaning. She flinched like I'd struck her. Maybe the truth hurt more coming from someone who'd loved you unconditionally. Maybe that's why she'd kept the shoebox, not as trophies, but as proof someone had once looked at her the way I had. When she drove away, the engine light stayed dark. I stood in the rain watching her taillights disappear, wondering if forgiveness was something you earned or something you outgrew. The garage radio played an old Springsteen song about things that don't die. I turned it up, loud enough to drown out the ghosts. The question wasn't whether I could forgive her, it was whether I'd ever stop forgiving the man I'd been when I loved her.